Keelan Gallagher, welcome to 7:30.
Thank you for having me.
Can you start, Keelan, by telling me what methods does the regime in Tehran use against its perceived enemies and opponents outside of Iran?
So Iran has been honing its tactics since 1979 in using the long arm of the state to try to silence their critics wherever in the world they may be. And it uses a wide range of methods. That includes both weaponizing the relatives who remain in Iran in order to try to silence people abroad. So bringing in relatives who are based in Tehran, for example, subjecting them to intimidatory tactics, imprisoning them, telling them that unless their relatives abroad stop acting as journalists or stop working on human rights issues, that they themselves will be targeted. Also freezing their assets. But increasingly we're seeing the use of physical attacks, online attacks, assassination attempts and rendition to try to bring people back within Iranian borders to target them.
And this is using tactics like kidnap, like assassination, attempted assassination in countries like the UK.
That's right. So just to give one stark example, my client Pouria Zarati, so a journalist working for Iran International, was stabbed in broad daylight on Good Friday last year, 2024, in London by three men who had flown in specifically in order to attack him through Heathrow, landed in Heathrow, came and stabbed him and flew out. And all of that happened before the authorities in the UK had scrambled to respond. And I've got to say, it was not a coincidence that that happened on Good Friday, on a bank holiday, because a particular tactic which I've seen over the last decade is Iran using holidays when the world is looking away, when parliaments are in recess, when the United Nations is not sitting in Geneva or New York, and they think that that's a good time to target people. They use Christmas holidays, for example. They use August. And it's why us having this conversation now is so critically important, because Iran has been ramping up its attacks against my clients, journalists doing their jobs, and others over the course of the summer holidays in Europe and when parliaments are on recess. And we've got to be particularly vigilant at a time like this.
And I just want to talk about Australia within this, because I understand that there are Australians who are also at risk. So obviously we've seen the attacks on the Jewish community in Australia, but opponents of the regime in Australia are also, or family members, are also at risk.
That's right. So Iran International is a popular TV station which reports to both people within Iran and the Iranian diaspora around the world, and has done so since 2017. And because of its work, essentially speaking truth to power and holding the Iranian authorities to account, they have been targeted by the IRGC and the intelligence agency within Iran for many years. Now, they have correspondents based in Australia, based in Melbourne, and there are also multiple family members of individuals who work for Iran International based in Australia. And regrettably, what we've seen over the last 6 to 7 weeks has been a ramping up of attacks upon Iran International journalists. We now have 45 journalists around the world who have been threatened with assassination if they don't immediately stop working for Iran International. And 315 family members around the world have also been targeted expressly, and that includes Australians.
Now, one of the issues that arose in this recent revelation of information about the operation of Iranians in Australia was the use of cutouts of criminal proxies. Are you seeing similar things in the UK and Europe? That is, the Iranian intelligence services using criminals to do their work?
That's right. And we're also seeing that happening in the US and in Canada. So Iran uses quite different tactics to other states when it comes to transnational repression. So Russia and Saudi Arabia, for example, will usually use their own operatives. Now, in some ways that means they may appear more professional, whereas sometimes the criminal proxy gangs can seem disorganised. But actually, my view is that using criminal proxy gangs creates real difficulties. It makes it far, far more difficult to trace. So, for example, the criminal proxies that are being used in the US and Canada tend to be South American drug gangs, for example. Within the UK, they're quite often using Eastern European based criminal gangs. And what that means is the tactics that are being deployed in each individual country may differ, and it's much, much harder to trace individuals. So when you have, for example, individuals travelling from Russia in order to try to assassinate journalists and critics abroad, we've been able to trace some of the same individuals who tried to carry out assassinations within the UK were then caught transiting between the US and Canada. So it was easier to track them because they were quite clearly state-linked. But Iran's use of these third-party proxies makes it far more shadowy and difficult to trace. And that's a particular problem that we're now facing, given the tactics which are being deployed in Australia.
We've had a debate here in the aftermath of the revelations yesterday about the government, which has said about the government's decision to prescribe Iran's intelligence service, the IRGC, with some criticism from the opposition that they should have done it sooner. But I note that it hasn't happened yet in the UK. Given the kind of activity that you're describing in the UK, why not?
Well, I'm very sympathetic to the many individuals in Australia who've raised real concerns about the delay in prescribing the IRGC. People like Kylie Moore-Gilbert, for example, members of the Iranian-Australian community who've been crying out for action to be taken. And indeed, of course, we know there was a Senate inquiry which called for the IRGC to be designated a number of years ago. So I understand those who say, well, why did Prime Minister Albanese and Foreign Minister Penny Wong not take action sooner? But the UK is a stark contrast. In the UK, the IRGC is not prescribed, and there's a number of reasons for that. Firstly, the Foreign Office in the UK says that it would close off diplomatic channels. So when they have British nationals detained abroad, or when they have individuals who are British or family members of British nationals in Iran, if they don't have an embassy there and they don't have diplomatic relations, closing off that line of communication would be problematic, for example. And the other line which is taken by the British government is that they're concerned about moving to prescribing as terrorist organisations which are military arms of a foreign state, because they're worried about where that may lead. So that's the kind of active debate that's happening in the UK. I remain extremely concerned that what we're dealing with in the UK, as we are around the world with the tactics Iran is now deploying against journalists and other critics globally, we are dealing essentially with a terrorist state. We're dealing with the nationalisation of tactics which are essentially terrorist. And my personal view is that the decision which has now been taken to prescribe the IRGC in Australia is the right one, and the UK should very belatedly follow suit.
Keelan Gallagher, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.